We are now recording. So, good afternoon and welcome to the March 2023 edition of the France and Colonies Zoom meeting. We have about 24 people on today, and our speaker is Clemens Albert, who sits in Germany. So we are attracting folks from across the ocean, and I see Peter Stockton is on from the UK and perhaps some others as well who I don't recognize. So Clemens is going to fill us in on New Hebrides, and just so you are teased a little bit, next month Loïc Dufresne will dig into the mysteries of the group type. We've got more coming in. So come back next month as well, and we'll have another speaker. And I'm also looking for more after April. April is the last one I have scheduled right now. So Clemens, let me turn the screen over to you and the microphone. I am going to mute everybody, and Clemens, you'll have to unmute yourself when I do. You are now muted.
I can't hear.
He's not speaking yet. There we go. Now we'll be able to hear.
Can everybody see my screen?
We can. We're seeing the editable version of your PowerPoint.
That's better.
There we go.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you for letting me speak tonight. Tonight's topic is the first definitive series of the New Hebrides that was issued in the virtual Goldfranc currency. The series was issued in 1938, and it was replaced by a new definitive series in 1953, and it covers the time before World War II, the time of World War II, which had a huge impact on the islands, and the time right after World War II, so just 15 years, but 15 years with a lot of history. The covers that I will show tonight are not the amazing gems of New Hebrides philately. It's certainly no high-end philately, but these are covers that are nice and exciting regarding the history of the times they were produced. So tonight is primarily about looking at nice covers. Okay. The series on the 1925 definitives, which is the predecessor of the 1938 definitives, British and French currencies were both expressed on both series, as you can see on the right. Above the French version, with the British currency on the left side and the French on the right side, and here the English version with where it is vice versa. In the 1930s, the relation between franc and pound sterling gradually changed, with the result that the dual currency issue of 1925 did not represent equivalent amounts of postage. So in 1925, for example, 1 pound sterling was 95 francs, and in 1938 it was 178 francs. So it had become possible to buy stamps cheaply in one currency and post in the other. And the solution was the fictional but stable gold franc or franc d'or, against which the others could move independently. The gold franc was a theoretical currency. There were no bills, no coins, a virtual currency that was used by the UPU for its postal rates. The 10 gold centime value was aligned to the first unit of French intercolonial postage, that was 60 centimes. This resulted in an exchange coefficient of 6 in 1938, which changed to 9 in 39, 10 in 1940, and 16 later on, thanks to inflation. The official exchange rates were used for further conversions to the British pound, if necessary. This was a complicated system, but given the situation in New Hebrides with at least two currencies, a logical system, and it prevented the necessity of overprints and stayed in use until 1977. It was designed by a French artist named Jean Cahors, whose real name was André Dupois. The engraving was done by J.G. Hall in Great Britain, and it was printed by Bradbury Wilkinson in Great Britain. The stamps show, you see them on the right side, the French one and the English one. They show a beach scene and the volcano on Lopeve Island in the central New Hebrides. There was only this one motif on every stamp. And 21 years after these stamps were issued, the volcano broke out, and it broke out so heavily that the whole population of Lopeve Island had to be evacuated, and they could not return until today. 12 values in each language were printed: 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40, and 50 gold centime, and 1, 2, 5, and 10 gold francs, plus 5 postage due overprints. The first day of issue was June 1st, 1938. And it is the usual design of the New Hebrides issues. It is on the French issue, the coat of arms of the British monarch on the left side, which was George VI at that time. And on the right side, the coat of arms of the French Republic. And on the English issue, it's just vice versa. On the left, there is a short article in Parisois regarding the issuing of this series. I give those of you who can read French some time to read it. And on the right side, there is an essay which is unfortunately not in my collection. I was the lucky second highest bidder in a Romeo auction a couple of years ago, and haven't found one since. Okay, that's the whole French set. 12 stamps plus 5 chiffres tax or postage due stamps. And that's the English set, 12 plus 5. You see that the design is rather French, while the colors are rather British. So a nice mixture. Sorry about that. The stamps were printed in sheets of 30. There is a sheet on the right side, as you can see. And as I said, the 1938 Goldfranc definitives play an important role in the philately and postal history of the archipelago, since their time of use covers the time before, the time of, and the time after World War II. World War II, as I said, had a lasting effect on the islands due to the huge presence of the American military on the islands of Espiritu Santo and FRT during the Pacific War. Okay, the covers. We have pre-war usage, a first day cover from the first day of issue, June 1st, 1938. Unfortunately, the stamp is severely damaged. I'm looking for another one for some years. Haven't found one that was acceptable so far. The tariff depended on the letter's destination, as usual. It was divided in colonial destinations and non-colonial destinations. Colonial destinations meant, besides France and the UK themselves, every territory that was in some sense linked to either the French or the British colonial empire, whether a colony, a protectorate, a mandated territory, or a dominion. So, for example, it was cheaper to send mail to Canada, which was a dominion, than to the United States. 10 gold centime was the colonial tariff for regular letters, which meant up to 20 grams. Those are typical letters to colonial destinations with the correct postage of 10 gold centime, one to France and one to Australia from the early days of the series in 1938, 1939. Those are registered letters. The registration fee of 20 gold centime was just added to the regular fee of 10 gold centime, so that made 30 gold centime. And as you can see on the right letter, which goes to England, has a mixed has mixed stamps, French 20 gold centime and the English 10 gold centime, which was quite usual at that time. They could be used together, and they were used together, so the people had no problem with that. The use of a 30 gold centime stamp for registered letters to colonial destinations was scarcer than the combination of small values, which is quite usual in French colonies, because the letter, the small values were printed in much higher numbers. So finding a registered cover to a colonial destination with the 30 gold centime stamp is not quite like winning the lottery, but it's quite unusual. This is early airmail. Please don't ask me about the rates. That's a very complicated topic in this period of history. Initially, the post had to be shipped to Australia before being flown out, but beginning in September 1938, an airmail service within the archipelago via Sydney was introduced. The left cover is one of my favorites because it comes from the very remote island of Pentecost, according to a note on the back of the letter. So quite unusual. Then we are in the time of World War II. With the beginning of the war in Europe, post leaving the condominium was censored. We have here two typical letters that were censored in Sydney. You see the Australian censor tape and the censor cachet with the number 2 on it, which meant it was censored in Sydney. So one regular cover to Sydney and one airmail cover to England, written by a member of the British administration in the New Hebrides to his parents in Bristol. Those are local letters. Local use is very rare due to the small number of Europeans in the island at that time, and of course it was not censored. There was no need to censor the local mail. The rate for local letters was obviously 5 gold centime. The one on the right was either double weight or simply overfranked. I know, but we know from a lot of letters that 5 gold centime had to be the local tariff. That's another local letter to Port Vila, and this was handled by the post office in Santo, on the island of Espiritu Santo, that opened on January 1st, 1940, and it was only the second post office in the whole archipelago. Before 1940, it was just the post office in Port Vila, and only 34 years after the establishment of the condominium, a second post office was established in the second largest village on the islands. That is an interesting letter because of the cancellation, a letter to Adelaide with a dump oval cancellation and with Australian censorship. The reason for that cancel is not known. However, it is assumed that it was applied to mail picked up on a boat south of Port Vila, where it could not be censored, and censorship was therefore deferred until the boat reached its port in Australia, which was in this case Adelaide, because of the number 4 on the cachet, which meant it was censored in Adelaide. Okay, the letter rate to non-colonial destinations, for example, Switzerland, was 30 gold centime. This letter to Geneva went through the condominium censorship, as you can see here on the left side, the censorship cachet, but it was not opened, probably because it went to the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, and the Red Cross probably seemed trustworthy. That is another letter that was not opened by the censor. I have no idea why. Maybe the addressee was known to them. Those are letters to the United States. One was censored in Australia, in Sydney, you know that already, and one was censored within the islands, within the New Hebrides, and we have, as everything, almost everything was bilingual, also a bilingual censorship tape, one in French, one in English. The letter on the right side is quite typical for some letters of that time. It looks ridiculously philatelic with the three different values. It is not. It's the correct rate, and as you can see, it's missionary mail. These three stems just was one possible way to make up the correct postage of 30 gold centime. Looks philatelic, it is not. Okay, that's another letter to the United States, another missionary letter. A lot of letters at that time were missionary letters. As you see, with the correct postage of 30 gold centime, that was censored in the New Hebrides in Port Vila. And the interesting fact about this letter is the sender of the letter. It was Bishop Jules Albert, a French Catholic bishop, which was the apostolic vicar of the New Hebrides between 1939 and 1945. The New Hebrides were an apostolic vicariate. I'm not sure if this is the correct pronunciation. And they became a full Catholic diocese only in 1967 when the apostolic vicar became the bishop of Port Vila. Some letters escaped censorship, especially before the Pearl Harbor attack, which brought World War II, which was until this day far away in Europe. It brought the war to the Pacific. After Pearl Harbor, I have never seen a civil cover that was not censored. Before Pearl Harbor, there were some, as for example, the one above, to Australia, and few others like the one at the bottom went through the U.S. Army censorship. In this case, it's probably because this letter was written by a U.S. Army chaplain to a fellow priest or pastor in Australia. The American troops were not allowed to use the condominium postal system. They had their own postal system for security reasons. Probably there was an exception for the chaplain. Censorship lasted officially until the end of the war in the Pacific, which was in August 1945. That's a letter from March 1945 to France, and because there was no need to censor letters to France anymore, France was already liberated in March 1945, there was no censorship anymore. That's one of my favorites. That is a censored letter that was not censored by the condominium authorities, but by the military, by the U.S. military authorities. It was a letter that a GI wrote to his brother who used to live in Honolulu, as you can see. And what he wrote was considered a threat to military security, and it was censored in January 1943, and it was only forwarded in July 1945 when the war was almost over. You can see on the right was what he's writing. He's basically just writing that the New Hebrides are a safe place and that he has nothing to do and he's enjoying life. That was considered a threat to military security. The Japanese were not supposed to know that. And that's why this letter was censored and reached its addressee with 2 years delay. Okay, post-war use, the time after World War II saw an immense increase in mail, especially air mail, because as a result of the American presence on the islands, they had a new airfield, and that made it easier to get to the islands. Here are two French missionary letters, which was certainly very nice to look at, very colorful. Better connections made airmail delivery faster and more convenient. Here are two covers remembering two first day of regular flights, one between Paris and Port Vila, of course not a direct flight, but both cities were connected to each other since that day, and the one on the left, the first regular flight between Noumea and Paris in 1949. It resulted in letters to destinations not seen before the war. For example, Argentina on the left side, and on the right side, a letter to Denmark. Letters to French colonial destinations are shown here, one to Saigon, Indochina, and one to the city of Casablanca in what was then French Morocco. Another registered letter to Casablanca. It's Casablanca again, but I just had to show this because I think it's very beautiful. That is an official letter to New Caledonia, which was the center of the French South Pacific at that time, from a notary to probably a judge at the court of first instance in Noumea. Correctly franked with 30 gold centime because it was registered. And Suva Fiji was.
What's the purple mark on that one, Clemens?
Where?
To the registry label.
Down below.
That seems to be a censure council. Censure something else.
Yes, it is.
I think it's Nouvelle-Calédonie, censure.
Yes, probably.
I can't read the final.
Has to be.
Noumea, maybe. Yeah, with the number 6.
Yes.
Or 9.
I never paid attention to that. Thank you. Okay. But Noumea was the center of the French South Pacific, and Suva Fiji, in a certain sense, was the center of the British South Pacific. Two letters to Suva. That's a nice missionary letter to Italy. Nothing special about it, just nice to look at. And airmail letters to Switzerland. For some reasons unknown to me, a letter to these destinations are relatively often to find in this period. Well, the Swiss were pretty much around at that time. Those are the United States. Okay, that's an example of sea post or ship mail. You can see it on the marking on the cachet, an intra-island cachet. Ships picking up mail from outer islands after leaving Port Vila in some cases carried their own postmark. This was quite usual in the 1920s and 1930s. In the 1940s, there are still some covers to find, but it became less and less probably because of the rise of airmail. And that is a registered mail return receipt. The registered letter was, according to the notice on the back, consigned to the recipient on the 1st of October 1946 on the island of Espiritu Santo. It was sent from Port Vila, the capital, and the 20 gold centime rate is completely undocumented. And the reason why this document did not follow the two-language rule is unknown. As you can see, it's all in French. No idea why there was no English version. on this cover, please don't pay attention to the stamp or to the marking or to the address, but only to the cachet on the left side. That is a cachet remembering the 10th anniversary of de Gaulle's BBC speech on June 18th, 1940. There are so far 12 letters known that were handled on the 18th of June 1950 with this cachet. Okay, then we are in 1941. We had some overprints. In September 1940, the New Hebrides were the first French overseas territory that declared its support for the France Libre resistance movement led by General de Gaulle. After the whole French South Pacific opted for the France Libre, soon afterwards, the stamp of New Caledonia, Wallis and Futuna, and the New Hebrides were overprinted in Noumea, but just the French issues. There are no Free France English issues. Quantity of the overprinted stamps, 1,200 complete sets of 17 plus 28,800 each of 5, 10, 15 gold centime. In addition, they were printed in higher numbers than in New Caledonia and in Wallis and Futuna. And 50% of the overprinted stamps were sent directly to de Gaulle's headquarters in London, where they became on the philatelic market. And the other 50% went on sale in Port Vila on the 15th of April, 1941. Most of the covers strength with the overprinted stamps are clearly philatelic, like this one here, especially in the combination on the right with the 5, 10, and 15 gold centime. It is philatelic because we know the addressee J.F. Hambly was a cover maker who was very active in the whole South Pacific. But there are also some commercial covers like this one here to Australia. A very patriotic cover with the Croix de Lorraine. That is a letter to the United States with a very late use of the 10 gold centime France Libre overprint. It was posted in 1946 from the tiny island of Ambrim, where the sender, Mr. Mitchell, ran a plantation, the Ranon plantation. He was writing to a librarian in Los Angeles, probably to order some books. The supplies of the overprinted stamps were exhausted in October 1943, but some stocks were obviously held in private hands, like the hands of Mr. Mitchell. Then we have the postage due stamps, 5 stamps of each series, the values of 5, 10, 20, and 40 gold centime, and the 1 gold franc issue were overprinted with postage due and chiffre tax. The English, of course, with postage due, and the French with chiffre tax, and also the France Libre issue. The stamps were sold in Port Vila from January 1939 on and are extremely rare on cover. Matter of fact, the France Libre issue, the chiffre tax issue, is non-existent on cover, which makes some sense because they were sold in sets. There are some philatelic covers out there. I was looking for a commercial one, and I was looking for the 10 years without success, and then I found this one on eBay. Which is one of, I think, 3 or 4 commercial covers known that with the postage due or chiffre tax stamps. That is a letter to Monsieur de Grange, who ran a plantation in the Bellevue plantation near Port Vila, and he got mail from a warehouse in Sydney where he ordered, I don't know, photos maybe. Which is not sufficiently franked and therefore taxed.
Excuse
Okay.
me. It looks like that last cover you showed had paraffins.
Yes,
Right. And what do they represent, sir?
those were the paraffins used by the warehouse. It was a huge warehouse. They had their own paraffins.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, the end on the 30th of April 1953, the Beach Gold Scene Currency Definitive Series was replaced by a new series of definitives. The carving issue, if you look at the stamp, you know why. The following year saw a steady increase in mail due to better international communication and especially a considerable expansion of airmail occurred in this time. One fact about the new issue, which is quite interesting, as usual on the issues, there was the coat of arms of the British monarch and the coat of arms of the French Republic. If you look at the coat of arms of the British monarch, it is still George VI. And in April 1953, George VI was dead for over a year. No idea why they didn't change it to Elizabeth, but well, I don't know why. Maybe someone else knows. Okay, that's it. Thank you for the attention, and please excuse my English.
Your English is excellent.
And so is your presentation.
Yes. Does anybody have questions for Clemens?
So, Clemens, I have a set from 1931 of the first omnibus rollout for France and 26 colonies. Does that I missed the first half of your presentation because I had the wrong address. Does that in any way tie into what you've just presented in the first 20 minutes?
The 1931 omnibus issues.
Yes.
There were no omnibus issues in the New Hebrides until 1949. The UPU issue was the first omnibus issue because there were British omnibus issues and French omnibus issues. They couldn't issue all, and that's why no omnibus issues at that time were issued at all.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you.
All the sensor numbers, were they all from Australia?
Pardon me?
All the sensor numbers, were they all from Australia?
The sensor numbers, yes. Some covers were from the New Hebrides themselves, where they were censored, and one I learned today was from New Caledonia, but most were from Australia.
The triangle with the number on it, 1, 2, 3, 4, were they
Oh,
all
okay,
Australian?
I see what you mean. Yeah, all Australia, yes.
Clemens, what caught my attention was all the different registry numbers, the little markers, pieces of paper and stuff, because you had hand stamps. You had obviously the Red Cross across both covers and stamps with them too. And you must have had at least 4, maybe 5 different pieces of paper that were literally used almost the same time from Port Vila, and I don't know why they would use one and not the other.
I have no idea either.
Yeah,
well, there was a British, an English one and a French one, so it's always 2. And
yeah,
I have no idea. Sorry about that.
Great presentation. I might have to go back and look at it after it was posted. And by the way, the perfect cover was nice. Thank you. The initials were AH and S.
Clemens, did they have any POWs in New Hebrides that they had the Red Cross committee mail, or was that unrelated?
I think it was unrelated.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just a comment, not a philatelic thing, but what's the probability of you getting an undamaged first day cover?
You have one?
No. but I have a recommendation, and it's something I did with a very, very rare Eagles cover from Guadeloupe years ago. I had it, the proper term is conserved in English, or repaired. And we have a wonderful person here in the United States, Nancy Poley, and she could take that cover of yours and make it look like it was never torn, either the stamp or the envelope. And if you exhibit this, you could say properly in your text that this cover is conserved. I mean, you don't have to hide it, but it will make it look much better. And I have to say, I felt much better for my cover when it came back, and it was unexhibitable as it was, and it was wonderfully exhibitable afterwards.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
I'm sure you have people like that in Germany who can do it, but if you don't, Nancy Poley in the United States, in Pennsylvania, she would do a magnificent job.
Thank you.
Ken, you didn't hear me.
No. Anybody else? All right, Clemens, let me thank you again, and I am going to turn off the recording. Anybody who wants to stay on and have a chat, we can do that also.